Well, the Ugandan's People Defense Forces troops have to be out of the South Sudanese territory for there to be anything like talks with the South Sudanese government. That is the ultimate demand that has been given by the SPLM and the SPLA-IO to the South Sudanese government and to the international community in resolving the recent conflict in South Sudan. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you about that particular story, as well as the dilemma of having two commanders-in-chief in the country, and the blame game that is in South Sudan currently of who has broken the agreement that was agreed in 2018. In this video as well, I'm also going to get into detail in the communique that was released by the SPLM-IO regarding the conflict in South Sudan and how the opposition party in South Sudan is viewing the entire conflict. Well, this is Bonafide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on the South Sudanese crisis, you get notified as soon as possible. Well, the conflict in South Sudan is increasing and it is spilling over to other states. This started in Nasir County, but right now other states are reporting clashes with the South Sudanese government and militia that are allied to the opposition in the country. It is important to note that this is not only affecting the situation inside the South Sudanese country, it is also affecting regionally because these people who are being fought in these countries, the innocent people who are fleeing the violence in these states, are going to other countries. Currently, about 80,000 people have fled to Ethiopia, and the numbers keep rising. Now, the regional bodies have given their statements regarding the conflict in South Sudan because they don't want it to escalate further, to go back to the civil war that South Sudan had from 2013 to 2018. Now, IGAD, the AU, the UN, and other bodies have given their statement, including presidents of neighboring countries, to ask the leaders in South Sudan to de-escalate. And this diplomatic effort has gone further, even to affect South Sudan negatively, because just recently, Germany closed its embassy in South Sudan because of these recent flare-ups of insecurity in South Sudan. Now, recently, the Uganda's People Defense Forces troops went in Juba to assist the South Sudanese government to fight the insurgencies in the country. Now, this move has been opposed by the opposition in South Sudan in a recent communication that they gave, and they were clear. They say that they renew the call for a withdrawal of the UPDF for a conducive environment to have negotiations of peace. The UPDF is solely to assist the South Sudanese government to fight these insurgencies in South Sudan. And when we are talking about these insurgencies, it is also important to note the ethnic differences in South Sudan that have led to these flare-ups, because many people who belong to the Nuer group are saying that they are the ones who are being negatively affected by the moves of the government of the day, which is led by President Salva Kiir, who is a Dinka. Now, one of the core agreements of the 2018 in terms of de-escalating the civil war that was in South Sudan was that both of the parties will merge their armies together to form one unified army of the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. But that has not been actualized, and that is what is now bringing all the tension in the country, because in this civil war, the Dinka versus the Nuer and allied groups had their different armies, and still there are those differences, and these people are still having weapons in the countries, and they have allegiances, or they pledge their allegiance to different people in the country. And when I'm talking about these people, I'm talking about the two major players in the conflict in South Sudan. That is President Salva Kiir, the current president of South Sudan, as well as the current first vice president of South Sudan, that is Riek Machar. Now, that brought up the dilemma that I started by talking about, and that is the dilemma of having two commanders-in-chief in the country. Currently, the framework that was given by the agreement that they had in 2018 is that there will be a unified army, but because that has not been actualized, it means that the allegiance that these armed groups are paying are to two different people who are on the top of the politics in South Sudan. That is Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. It categorically means that there is a possibility of having two commanders-in-chief in South Sudan, and that is something that Salva Kiir is opposed by saying that there cannot be a dilemma of having two commanders-in-chief in a single country. Now, the SPLM-IO gave its view about that, and in that communique, they quoted Chapter 2, Article 2.731 of the ARCSS, that is the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict in the Republic of South Sudan. And they say that it stipulates that His Excellency Dr. Riek Machar shall continue to serve as SPLM and SPLA-IO Commander-in-Chief until the completion of the unification of all forces. And this is also captured in Article 2.41 of the ARCSS. And that means, according to the SPLM-IO party, Riek Machar is still the commander-in-chief of the forces that he led during that civil war until the complete unification of all these forces to be under the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. And that now brings up the conflict that is brewing time and time again in South Sudan of who exactly is in charge of the armed forces in South Sudan. Well, that can be compared to the power sharing deals that many countries have across the world. In many countries, a power sharing deal often stipulates that one person, of course, will be the president and the commander-in-chief of the entire armed forces, but they will be in consultation with another party in moves that will be made in that government. And that is another problem in South Sudan in the current crisis, because the SPLM-IO is saying that the violence in Nasir could have been avoided if the South Sudanese People Defense Forces complied with the original plans by the Joint Defense Board to deploy a unified force in Nasir to ensure that there is disarmament of the youth who are not in the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. The government of the day just wanted to disarm people who are not part of the army so that they can reunify the army to be under one commander and to have one South Sudanese People Defense Forces. But it seems as if there are people high in the ranks that do not want that total reunification of that particular army. It also means that there is some kind of ways that the government is also acting that is doubting to the opposition, that they say that they are not ready in one way or another to have this reunification of the army in South Sudan. And of course, the reunification of this army will mean that one party will be stronger than the other. And the relinquishing of power is something that many leaders, especially in Africa, will not want. And that is the problem that is bedeviling South Sudan right now, because it means that the president, Salva Kiir, will be the total commander-in-chief of the army in South Sudan. And perhaps the opposition is not ready to have that kind of a conversation in South Sudan currently. But there are situations where the opposition comes out to say that it is ready for a reunification, but there are some specific steps that had to be followed that were not followed. And this includes, as per the statement that was given by the SPLM-IO, that included to heed to the first vice president's advice to delay the force movement for 2 weeks for engagement of Nuer armed youth. We are talking about the conflict that happened in Nasir, where the White Army attacked the South Sudanese People Defense Forces, and that caused the entire flare-up of the security situation in South Sudan. Now the opposition of the day is saying that you should have listened to our leaders if you want to go to our territory to conduct that disarmament. You cannot go to our territory to conduct a forceful disarmament of our people without consulting the leaders, without having that particular backing of the leaders of that territory for you to have the blessings to conduct that particular disarmament. It means that the White Army were hostile to the South Sudanese People Defense Forces because the government did not have that consultation with the army for disarmament efforts. And on a question on why there are so many armed groups in South Sudan, they are saying that These armed groups exist in the country because of self-protection, because the government has not offered enough protection to them. That is a statement as per the SPLM-IO, that many of these armed groups, including there are armed groups that are supported by the government and are simply operating the same way that these armed groups are operating in the opposition. They are saying that, similar to other groups that now are being supported by the government, the White Army is also arming themselves because of self-protection from hostile communities or hostile forces that will attack the community. Well, the rhetoric and accusations that are flaring up in South Sudan are not helping to de-escalate the situation in the country. In fact, many analysts are saying that the South Sudanese government is teetering towards another civil war. Well, we hope that doesn't happen. Keep it bona fide for the latest information on what is happening in South Sudan.